This is the second episode of my series of shorter videos called Level Analysis. In this video, I'm going to apply cadence analysis to two chapters of Portal 2. Those chapters are The Fall and Reunion. In these levels, we're going to look at the patterns of evolution and expansion that center around the three different types of gel, with specific attention to how the designers mix and match those properties across the course of numerous set pieces. Because this is a set piece game rather than a composite game, and because we're covering a very large section of the game, there isn't a single standard challenge. Rather, it's best if we think of the three color gels as each having their own standard set piece. The first one we encounter is the blue gel, which preserves Chell's momentum in the form of a bounce. A single bounce across this pitfall is all the set piece requires in any direction. The player has to use a portal to get a greater height in order to get out of the room, but a single bounce still gets Chell across the gap. In the next set piece featuring the blue gel, the obstacle evolves. Here the player has to create a way to get up higher to take advantage of the blue gel's bounce property by activating switches that reveal new panels. Path creation is the essential task of the Portal games. It's just in a more advanced context here than it was in most of the previous game. Once the switches are active, the player can create paths on higher panels, then leap out of them to bounce toward the exit. This is an evolution that combines path creation with bounce jumps and an expansion in the height of the jump. In the third set piece in this sequence, there's an evolution by inversion. Previously, the player had to create a path by placing portals around a static spot of blue gel. Here, the player has to create a path by moving the blue gel itself. This is a clear challenge to the player's way of thinking. Up until this point in the chapter, it has usually been Chell, the player character, who has flown out of portals. Now the player has to think about how Chell would fly, but substitute the blue gel for her. The set piece plays with that idea in a few different ways. For instance, the player has to use the angled platform to throw blue gel across the test chamber to make a bounce spot on the path to the exit. We'll see a lot more of this design idea throughout this analysis. The fourth set piece also requires the player to move blue gel around, but this time it adds a time dimension. The stream of water here washes away the gel in the spot the player needs it to be. Thus, the player has to move some blue gel off to the left side of the test chamber, bounce into the air to hit a switch, and then quickly apply the gel to the required landing spot before the switch deactivates and the water resumes flowing. Oddly enough, this is the only instance of a time variable being added to this entire sequence. In the fifth set piece, we have an evolution of the fourth set piece. This time, not only does the player have to move the blue gel, but there's also a new target. Instead of simply making a path by laying down blue gel, the player uses the gel to make this cube bounce around. First doing so inside the glass case, and then using it to move the cube off the switch, which lowers the elevator. The player character herself only has to jump once. Set piece 6 actually harkens back a few set pieces to the third set piece. As in the third set piece, the player needs to simply create a jump path by splattering part of the test area with the blue gel. This time around, however, there's an evolution of context. Instead of solving a puzzle in a nice bright test chamber, the player has to figure out how to turn the terrain of the backstage area into a path. That's a qualitative difference, so it's an evolution. But the part that makes this puzzle really tricky is the distance between the gel dispenser and the target. The gel dispenser is all the way back in part of a previous test chamber, whereas the target is across a huge gap. A portal gun can reach across essentially any distance, but the player might not think of it that way at first. This is a great example of an expansion used to make a puzzle more confusing, a technique we'll see a lot more of in this sequence. The seventh set piece introduces the red velocity gel, which causes the player character to accelerate very quickly and to reach a much higher top speed. Unlike the first set piece in this sequence, which merely introduced the blue gel with few complications, the red gel is introduced with several different puzzles to solve. First, the player has to use a portal to spray the red gel all over the runway in the middle of the chamber. Then he or she has to do the same for the walkway across the gap. This is another example of the long-distance puzzle expansion from the previous set piece, but with a different kind of gel. For a third look at the uses of the red gel, the player also has to use it to fly up and hit the final switch. This makes for an intra-set piece evolution by inversion. In the 8th set piece, the red gel and blue gel are combined. In this set piece, the player has to not only move the gel with portals, but also do it in the right order. Gel has to accelerate on a lane of red gel and then bounce high to the next platform via the blue gel. This is combined with the classic portal momentum saving mechanic on the other side of the far platform. The 9th set piece begins to really dig in to the kinds of evolutions that made up the second half of the first Portal game. In most of the previous set pieces, the path through the test chamber was relatively clear, but the player had to figure out how to make it happen. Here, the player also has to figure out where the path is at all. The problem breaks down into 2 stages. First, the player has to use the red goo to accelerate shell, and then shoot out of the portal at a counterintuitive reflex angle. The actual execution of this jump is quite easy. It doesn't even require pressing the jump button. But it can challenge the player's imagination a little bit because this particular angle is an uncommon one up to this point in the game. The second part of this set piece is an expansion of the first part, which moves both the launch portal and the bounce platform further from the source of the goo. Also, the player has to repair an intermediate platform by hitting it with blue gel, portaled in from the source. In the 10th set piece, the player encounters something which appears radically different, but which is actually incredibly idiosyncratic to the Portal games. The white gel turns any solid surface into a portal target. By connecting to the source of the goo, the player can paint the entire arena to get shell up to the next exit. The main jump of this set piece is a totally conventional redirection of momentum from an angled exit portal. But to set that up, the player needs to paint these pillars with goo all the way to the top, and then create a landing zone. Like the previous set piece, this one is based on an evolution in deduction. None of the jumps in this set piece require quick reactions or precise firing. The player simply arrives in a blank arena and has to figure out where the path is supposed to be. But if the Portal games are essentially about path creation, then this set piece is Portal at its most idiosyncratic. It also makes me wonder if this level was the inspiration for Splatoon. The 11th set piece, the pinnacle for these 2 chapters, is another evolution in order. The essential shape of this set piece is totally standard. The player needs to fly out of an angled portal to a high ledge. We've seen that many times before. The mechanics involved are all familiar too. The blue gel, red gel, and white gel all return. The difference is that the player needs to use them in the right 3-step order to set up the otherwise obvious runway and bounce spots. This means first using the white portal gel to make more portal surfaces, then the red gel to create a runway, and finally the blue gel to propel off the runway. This set piece also uses the game's idiosyncratic puzzle by expansion. The player has to move some more white gel to the high platform in order to place blue gel on key landing spots, preserving Chell's momentum across her very long jump. Let's take a look at the cadence pattern these set pieces form. Set pieces don't always form nicely structured cadences because each one takes so long and often has smaller evolutions or expansions within it. There is a shape to these 2 chapters, however, if a slightly atypical one. The beginning of the cadence is all about slowly evolving the uses of the blue gel. First, the player has to make new paths to get to a greater height. Then the player has to move the blue gel instead of moving the player character. Then there's a one-off timer evolution that doesn't go anywhere. This chain of evolutions continues along the theme of moving the blue gel to more useful locations. First, this happens to get the blue gel to break the cube out of its sealed box. Then the player moves it across the large gap in the backstage area of the testing chambers in the puzzle by expansion, which is so important to the voice of the Portal games. Then things get a little weird when the red gel enters the cadence. The red gel is introduced and receives 2 iterations, a puzzle by expansion followed by an evolution by inversion. Then the red gel is combined with the blue gel in 2 set pieces, which test the player's ability to mix and use the 2 kinds of gel. At first this happens in a straightforward evolution in order, then in a diffuse multi-step process across an expansive test chamber. Then the white gel is introduced in its own set piece, before being added to a final set piece, which brings all three gels together in an evolution of order mixed with a puzzle by expansion. This set piece does basically everything one set piece can do in this context. The overall shape is a little atypical. I might call this shape the convoy cadence, as it involves multiple outside ideas appearing and then joining the main stem of the cadence out of nowhere. As I said, set pieces don't always make for reproducible cadence shapes, but this series should examine more instances of that to find out for sure. What I've shown so far is just the major set pieces that relate to one another in a cadence pattern. Portal 2 is a set piece game, however, so there's more going on. The largest part of any set piece game is made up of set pieces, which are extended, self-contained, and often quantitatively focused, although that last criteria doesn't apply to this game as much. Between those set pieces, though, there are bits of what I call through content. Through content is shortered and scattered piecemeal throughout a level. For the most part, through content in Portal 2 is like the puzzles in the second half of the first Portal game. The goal is clear, and even the type of jump is clear, but the portal targets are hidden in an expansive and varied environment that can sometimes make it difficult to find them. But again, these tend to be very quick, and they almost always tend to involve falling into a portal from a great height, or shooting a portal to a great height in order to jump to an otherwise straightforward platform. The last thing I want to point out about this cadence is that towards the end, there's a simple but strange puzzle involving a stream of white gel and a ventilation system. Here the player has to feed the gel stream into the vents, causing it to splatter all over the sankled passageway. Afterwards, the climb itself is quite easy, because almost everything has become a portal target. This is a great example of the reward by fun principle I talk about in reverse design Super Mario World. It's a low effort challenge with a cool one-off mechanic that helps to break the tension after a long series of tricky set pieces. Level analysis and my topics series, the Game Design Extracts, are supported by Patreon. Patreon backers get extra videos and extra articles not available to the public. Thanks for watching.